we think about fruit types from an evolutionary perspective, we've got potentially some selection driving us from one fruit type into another. We've seen the relative advantages of these. We sort of talked about animal versus abiotic pollination in flowers. You can talk about the advantages of animal dispersal of seeds versus abiotic dispersal of seeds. Similar thing. So if you're going to make a fleshy fruit, you're making this flesh as a nutrient reward to an animal, nutrient enticement. You might be forced to put more energy into the production of this set of fruits than this set of fruits. But maybe the trade-off is that you get more effective dispersal. And then another way to think about this, so we can see maybe relative advantages here. This is more efficient, more I guess, less costly, more costly, but more effective. And so transitioning from one to the next, what do you have to change? Well, going from dry indehiscent to fleshy is sort of taking that ovary tissue and making it fleshy. So during the process of fruit development, the fruits become fleshy, they become sugary and colorful, and then they sort of take on a different appearance. And then you can think of other transitions. So dry indehiscent to dry dehiscent involves developing a seam that will break open at maturity. Not so much of a difference there. Maybe a bigger difference to go between these two. So if you think about which transitions are more likely, I'd say maybe going between fleshy to dry dehiscent seems more like a two-step process. So what do we think is more likely? We could actually look at this in a phylogenetic context. Now this is the rose family. We've seen there's a whole lot of craziness there. Big group for accessory tissue involved in fleshy fruits, and also the ones that are dry. So we had this dry tissue assisting in seed dispersal for the Agramonia genus. And you can take a phylogeny of these different fruit types. They got some pretty heavy terminology here. There's a couple that are familiar, drupe and akene. And then these other ones, might have to look them up a little bit. Pome, this is a more technical term for the kind of fruit that an apple or a pear is. So we see a evolutionary reconstruction based on the phylogenetic relationships of follicetum, so aggregate of follicles basically is the ancestral version, and then switching to different types and different groups. So ancestral dry dehiscent fruit type becomes, here we go, a fleshy accessory fruit in the pomes. This one, coxetum, kind of the same thing, berries. Down here, we've got aggregate of fleshy fruits in rubus. We've got some dry, let's see, in the base here, dry indehiscent aconitum is an aggregate of indehiscent dry fruits. So a little modification to become maybe hooked in places. The strawberry becomes fleshy in the receptacle, but still has these dry indehiscent fruits on the outside. A little switch here in the blackberries and raspberries to fleshy fruits. So you can see kind of how many times we switched from one of these fruit types into another. Just a little cheeky throwback to some of our emoji. So lots of emoji in the rose family. Apples and pears, closely related, same fruit type, basically. Peaches and cherries, closely related, same fruit type, basically. Strawberries, rather bizarre version with this accessory tissue and achenes on the outside. So independent origins of these different fleshy fruit types in the rose family, with an ancestral reconstruction for dry dehiscent in this yellow zone or dry indehiscent in the blue zone. So a few different independent transitions toward fleshy fruits as the animals were being recruited. That kind of brings us around to this study. This is a study of kind of where the fleshy fruits came from. And as I got pointed out here, this is a tree of rosids. So it's sort of rose family and much broader set of its relatives. Somewhere on there, where we got the rose family. There's the rose family, Rosaceae down here. So we have Rosales and even some closely related orders in this group. And a few independent origins of vertebrate fruit dispersal. So anything that's not white is a vertebrate fruit dispersal. A few different independent origins, and the question of how they got to that point would be sort of an independent question in each of these different groups. We could look at the kinds of animals that are typically dispersers. I mentioned that birds are really a nice animal to have disperse your seeds because they don't chew their food. Another advantage of birds, think about it for a second, birds fly, so they have a much better chance of dispersing seeds over long distances in a short time. So if a bird is eating seeds and flies a few miles away, that's not such a big deal for a bird, but making it a few miles away would be a big deal for a rodent, for example. So this just shows a few different plant groups and the proportion of animals that are dispersing, and birds win out for all these different groups. So did plants exist with fleshy fruits before there were animals to disperse them? Well, let's find out. Turns out that the origin of the fruit dispersers, we've got frugivores. These are animals that are a little specialized to eat fruits. They showed up basically before fruits were a big thing on the global stage. So a few plants figured out how to recruit animals to disperse their seeds. And once those animals were keyed into this process, kind of evened out the playing field, made it a lot easier for other plant groups to figure out how to disperse their seeds using animals. So kind of shifted the evolutionary landscape to favor fleshy fruits that attracted animals. And that's basically because the animals were already present. So that's our evolutionary evidence here. Kind of wrap up with this concept. In North America, North and South America in particular, we have a lot of plants, native plants to North and South America that sometimes don't seem to have anybody dispersing them, but they're still large, fleshy fruits. So why would a plant make a big fleshy fruit when it doesn't have an animal to attract to disperse it? And this has been described as ghosts of evolution. So the running hypothesis, there's a lot of support for this. The running hypothesis is that there were animals, but they went away. So basically in the course of human migration, when humans migrate to a place that has large animals, like these large extinct animals from North and South America, those humans have been very effective. We're talking tens of thousands of years ago. Humans were very effective at driving these animals to extinction. So whether it's because they were a good food source, they weren't really adapted to running away from humans, or just maybe simple competition for food. The humans ended up driving them out and they became extinct. We had our own rhinoceros type of animals, giant ground sloths, North and South American elephants. And the thought is that these were the animals that these plants evolved to have as their dispersers. So big fruits with big seeds could have been dispersed by these really large animals that we just don't have anymore. But nonetheless, the plants stick around. They didn't strictly need the animals to get their seeds around. They might be able to, in some cases, they just drop their seeds on the ground where they are. But plants are pretty long-lived. So there's 10,000 years or more since we have not had these animals. The plants that used to use them as dispersers are still around. There are quite a few, some of them with more culinary significance. So a variety here of fruits that have these combinations of maybe big fruits, big seeds. Good examples here, kind of at the same scale for some of these. So potentially the ones that are on the slide here, these show plants that would have been dispersed, had their seeds dispersed by large animals. So maybe yes. And I just want to leave you with this thought here that a lot of people like to sort of explain this using extinct animals. There's also a whole lot of kind of diminished or extinguished native cultures. So native people in North and South America were very abundant prior to the settlement by Europeans. One of the first things that happened after Europeans, quote, discovered the New World one of the first things that happened was they brought germs that just wiped out a whole bunch of people. Large percentages of the population just died because of these diseases they weren't prepared for. And so we don't, in the Western history records, we don't really have records of a lot of people who used to be in these areas. So this is a map of the Amazon basin. And I think having this, being a little more sensible about who was there in the past, allows us to take a much more appropriate approach to figuring out basically what their effect was on the landscape. So you could say we have these giant plants with big seeds because there were giant extinct animals, or these could be also the result of human selection. So a lot of these are currently cultivated by people, commercially important. Nothing to say that the humans that existed in these areas were not responsible for modifying these in ways that made them more palatable to people. So maybe giant animals, maybe largely extinguished human populations. Some people are still working on separating those ideas out.